Okay, so in the last tutorial we discussed about the application context and a brief overview of the bean life cycle, where I told you that we have a bean like factory, and then bean factory post processors, and then we have the bean post processors with some init and destroy method. That was just a layman explanation of you. So today we'll be discussing about the entire Spring Bean life cycle, like from the starting from the bean factory being getting loaded, and then how beans are being configured in that bean factory, and internally how the aware interfaces, post processor interfaces, and bean factory post processors are being called. So this is the life cycle of my bean. So let me just zoom it. Okay, so what first step is that bean factory is being loaded. This could be a bean factory or an application context. This is done when you are writing the line bean factory and then creating an object equal to new class path XML bean factory. So with that, this is being created. After that, we have a let me just show you. See, here in the display data, you are having this application context. This is just like my bean factory or an application context. It is being loaded, right? Then we have a bean factory post processor. When a bean factory is loaded, at this point of time only bean definitions are loaded in this. What do you mean by the term bean definitions being only loaded? Means like if we are having, suppose, a bean manager which is having two member variables, city and a house number. So it will load a bean with the name manager, with house number and a city with this bean definition, but the values are not being set at this point of time. So after the bean definitions are loaded in this, we call the bean factory post processor. Yes, so we call the bean factory post processor. This could be my own written bean factory post processor, and you will study about the another one in the coming tutorials, property placeholder configurer. So that is also can be called. And after this bean factory post processor is loaded, we need to now instantiate the beans. That is means populating the properties. Now the whatever the properties are, after the bean factory post processor has put those properties in my placeholder configurer. Like if you see in the spring.xml, I am using over here, since we have discussed everything now, so you can see here we are having a property placeholder. So this will call my bean factory post processor and put the values over here. Now we need to instantiate the bean, that is populate the properties. So the bean definitions is loaded at this point of time. Bean factory post processor is just going to put the placeholder value, the variable values in those placeholders, and now with the instantiation of beans is being done. That is, the properties are being populated or being assigned. Now this property, the first property like city will get its value, house number will be equal to this. So complete bean is now being done. After this, if checks whether any bean has implemented the aware interfaces or not, so it will call those aware interfaces which we studied in the tutorial. So bean name aware is being called. This is the first aware interface, and when it is being called, we call the set bean name method, which will give you the bean name. Similarly, you can call application context aware interface, or we can have a bean factory aware interface in case you are using the bean factory container, and then that set application context is being called. After the bean properties are being populated, the aware interfaces are being called. So now this is also being done. So till now we have done the bean factory post processing, populating the properties and calling the aware interface. Now all the beans are being ready, right? So all the beans are being readied. At this, calling the aware interface, it will call the my bean post processor, which is a separate class which we wrote in the tutorial. And we have two methods over here, right? We have a post process before initialization and post process after initialization. So now the bean post processor comes into picture, that is after the beans are being populated. the first method which it will call is, it will be done for each bean, right? And it will call the pre-initialization method, means it will call the post process before initialization. Pre here means the before initialization, sorry. So this method will be called, and we will pass the bean because we have the entire bean now, right? Before this bean post processor only, we have the complete bean. Only at the time of bean factory the bean definitions were there, not the entire bean. But at this point we have the complete bean. So bean is being passed, and along with that we will pass the bean name also. So we will do some processing on that bean. If we want to do some changes, we can do anything we can do in this post processor. So before initialization of post processor method is now called. So after this the method, the next bean life cycle is the calling the initializing beans interface. Remember, we studied in this manager and in the director also we have an initializing bean and a disposable bean, right? We also studied that we can write our own init and destroy, but first the initializing bean has a method after properties set. So first it will call the initializing bean interface method, that is after properties set, and after that it will call the custom init method. Suppose you have written any custom init method in your application like public void init or public void destroy, it will call that method, which you will be defining it definitely in your spring.xml with the with this, like you write the attribute init method. And then alternative to this also we studied in the annotation tutorial that we can have a @ post construct and @pre-destroy, right? So either you can write my init and define the init attribute in this spring.xml from manager, or write @post construct. So first default method is being called, and then the custom init method by defining this init attribute or at the post construct. This is done. Now after this again a bean post processor is called, but the post initialization method is called. That is, now in the bean post processor this method will be called post process after initialization. So this will have some bean and a bean name. Again you can do some processing if you want to in this case also. Now the bean is completely ready to be used, because if some changes are also being done then we can. And finally after this the bean is ready to use, and we move from this to the context.getBean and we use this bean. So before coming to this only, the bean goes through this entire life cycle from the bean factory to bean factory post processor, and then from bean factory post processor to populating those properties and instantiating these beans, then calling the aware interfaces, and after this calling the bean post processor pre-initialization method, calling your custom init and default init methods, and then post initialization method, and finally using the bean. After this, I also told you if we can have abstract application context, we can shut down that hook. So in that scenario, this is completed. Now when this container is shut down, all the beans need to be destroyed, and we discussed the two interfaces for that also. That is my pre-destroy, and the default one was given by the disposable bean. So again, first the disposable beans destroy method will be called, and then the call custom destroy method is called, and the bean is being completely destroyed. So this is the entire bean life cycle. The bean, each bean goes through, which is being defined in spring.xml. So we have covered this because we have now covered each and every topic, so it will be easy to understand the life cycle of a bean.